Hey, welcome back, everybody. Of course, you know me. My name is Dr. Keith McNally. This is the Question Guy podcast. I'm here with Susan Knight, and she's going to tell us her story because she had a critical pivot moment in her life, and she's going to share that with all of us today. Susan, welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, where do you want to get this conversation started? It's going to be emotional, just for a disclaimer for our audience, but it's going to be empowering all at the same time. So, in your perspective, where should we get started?
I think the best place to get started is Friday afternoon. My husband and I sitting chatting, and then
Okay.
it kind of things kind of go from there. So,
Okay. And given that it's Friday afternoon at the time of this recording, that seems very appropriate.
all right. So this was Friday afternoon several years ago, um, and sort of a normal Friday afternoon. My husband had come home from a business meeting. Uh, and he was telling me all about it. And so, we're chatting just very normal. And everything was fine. And we had our chat, everything's good. Afterwards, he goes off to do his thing. I go off to do my thing. I'm sitting reading a book. He comes, over and sits beside me, snuggles up, wants to know what I'm reading. So again, very close, affectionate, intimate. And as he looks over at the book, and I even remember it was a calendar of wisdom by Leo Tolstoy. It has different sayings for every day of the year. So, he looks over and he starts reading from it. And then he changes. His voice changes. And I said, Dave, if you're joking around, it's not funny. You're scaring me. Stop. And then he started running around the room and just saying things that didn't make sense. And I knew something was wrong, obviously. And then he stopped running around the room, but he was flailing, like just his arms were flailing, like literally flailing. And I tried to sort of put my arms around him to calm him down, and I'm trying to speak, like, Dave, it's okay, calm down. And in that process, he wound up knocking my glasses off of my face. And he wasn't trying to hit me or anything like that. It's just he could not see me. He was so disconnected from the moment that he couldn't see me. And at that point, I realized something's very, very wrong. And then he stopped flailing and he just froze. And when I say froze, I mean just rigid from head to toe, rigid, frozen, not communicating, not seeing anything. So I gently gave him a push because we were by the bed. And as he fell onto the bed, his body, it didn't like the way you would normally kind of bend or crumple when you go fall down that way. From head to toe, his body just remained rigid,
Mm.
um, just frozen. And he went and just was there on the bed. And it wasn't so much sort of an intellectual thing that came to me, but it was more a visceral gut feeling that, you know, he's disconnected from reality. I recognized sort of altogether that this was some kind of psychotic break, something of that nature. Um, and I had the work background in the mental health sector. So, I kind of had some of that to draw on. So I knew this was serious. I had a sense of what was happening. And I thought, if he's not connected to reality and he can't see me, as Susan, his wife, and he doesn't know who I am or what he's doing, I just recognized the level of danger in that moment that I thought, when he comes out of this frozen state, I don't know what state he's going to be in. And he could be capable of doing something that he doesn't even realize he's doing. And so I just ran out of the place. And when I say I ran out, I mean, I didn't even grab my handbag. I just grabbed the car keys and got out. And I just drove over to a nearby plaza and I was just sitting in the parking lot trying to compute what I had just seen and what had just happened. Um, And, time passes. And at some point I realized, okay, I've got to come back, get in some one way or another. But I was scared to come back in because I didn't know what I was going to be coming back into. And so I called 911 and explained what had happened and that I needed an escort to come in. So the police showed up, and thankfully they were great. But the first thing they asked me as they were getting ready to enter was, what's the layout of the place and where is the kitchen? And of course, they wanted to know where the kitchen is so they would know, where knives are. And it just really impressed upon me just how potentially dangerous the situation, might have been. So the police enter the place and they call out to him, and he has no he's dazed. He doesn't know what's happening. They wind up taking him to the hospital, to emergency. I drive over to the hospital afterwards. And as we're there at the hospital, he starts to kind of come back. So I'm getting my Dave back again. He's coming back to normal, but he has no recollection of what has happened. He can remember coming home and us talking. He can't remember anything after that. That's very scary to me because he has essentially lost, an hour or two of his life and he just can't remember anything. So we're at the hospital. And again, I don't really have time. Like I, it's all happening so quickly and I can't really process things because I'm trying to calm. Well, not that he needs calming down at that point, but he's asking questions. And so I'm trying to be supportive to him. So I'm just very much in the moment as opposed to really processing it. At the hospital, we're there for hours. He's getting tired. He's hungry. He wants to come home. And at the hospital, they just say, well, he seems fine. So why don't you go back home? So we come back home that Friday night. But something has happened and he's sort of in and out. So one moment, everything's fine. Another moment, he's not himself. Another moment, there's sort of this kind of dark energy coming from him. I don't know how else to put it. Um, and then there are times where he's taking a very dark tone towards me, which is very unnerving, not because of anything specific that I've done, just in a general way. So it's very up and down. And long story short, that the weekend is very intense. Just he's all over the place. I don't know what I'm dealing with from moment to moment. Um, Also, towards the end of the weekend, it seems to me that he might be going towards a manic state. Um, he's lost any filter, so he's saying a lot of inappropriate things. Um, and it's just getting more and more frightening for me. And so by the Sunday night, I say to him, I think maybe it's a good idea if I just leave for, a few days and give you some space and he's fine with that. He says, yeah, sound again, he's unfiltered. So he's just like, yeah, you won't be there nagging me to clean up. Great. you know. So um so that's kind of what we agree on. And so I call a friend, ask if I can stay with her. The Monday I leave to stay with that friend. And that was it. That was the end of the marriage. We we were never under the same roof again. And I didn't realize that at the time. I wasn't, I mean, I could barely think at the time. I was still, there was still sort of the after effect from that Friday and having to run out of the place and just how shocking and scary that was. So I wasn't really thinking far ahead. I was just thinking in the moment. Um, but yeah, when I left that Monday, that was it. He would go on to become quite ill. It would be very up and down. We're still in touch. But again, even that was very erratic. Sometimes we'd have a normal exchange. Um, Sometimes his emails and conversations would, again, take that dark tone and not full on threatening, but menacing would be the word. And that was very difficult to take. Other times, like I said, our communication would be fine. And then there were times where he continued to have episodes. And, I recall one time where he got in touch with me and, he felt he was a danger to himself and others. So he'd gone to hospital and he just wanted me to go and sit with him and, stay with him there. So we were still in touch, but apart. And as the weeks and months went, it became very clear that this just is not tenable. He's not the same person. There's a lot going on. It's and I'm afraid of him. It's just that simple. I don't feel safe. And we we had a few issues in the marriage, sort of leading up to that. I say a few issues, but on the other hand, there was a lot that was so great because we had been very close friends for 10 years before we got married and then married for 7 years. So 17 years of being this person being one of my closest friends. So there was a lot of, I guess, holding things together in the marriage in spite of the ups and downs. So I was not planning for a separation, in any way, shape, or form. So, I was left at this place where it was really difficult because on the one hand, because of the safety element and how I was feeling and the state he was in at that time and how things were going, I there was a clarity that this is not tenable, um, crystal clear. On the other hand, I could not compute that from that Friday afternoon when all was well to the Monday when I was gone, that was it. That just in a weekend, it ended. My brain just could not compute that. So I was stuck in that place of trying to reconcile all of that for a while. And it was just very difficult. I did sort of come to I guess, the realization or the acceptance that it was over. And, I mean, I'm not the first person to have to recover from, a marriage that has ended, but there were a few other things going on. Shortly before things ended, my job of 14 years, I had resigned. Now, I left on good terms, but still, that was 14 years at the same place, very much a part of my identity, very much an anchor for me. So I left that. I was now freelancing, so very new territory, getting sort of my bearings around that. And then also a religious group that I'd been part of for close to 15 years. I had left that just before the marriage ended. Again, and that was, I mean, that was all of my social connections, my social activities, my entire community, the culture that I was involved with. So all of that, when I left that group, I left all of that. So again, that was another anchor. So bottom line, I'm at this place where this anchor of the marriage and of that 17-year friendship, the anchor of the job, the anchor of this religious community and that side of things, all the anchors seem to be gone. And again, it's just reconciling all of that. And there was there was just such an emptiness and a lostness at that time, a destabilization. I remember playing a Stevie Wonder or attempting to play a Stevie Wonder CD. It's Talking Book. That's the album. And one of the songs, the lyrics are, "Where is my spirit? I'm nowhere near it." I could not listen to the song because when I heard those lyrics, I just thought, that is where I'm at right now. My body is alive, but where is my spirit? Where is my spirit? And I just felt, I really had that sensation of just, where is it? I'm nowhere near it. And that was the point where it kind of hit me that, okay, you need to rebuild now. And that's kind of when the clarity around rebuilding needs to begin. That's when it really hit me just clearly. And the rebuilding started sort of from that point on.
Well,
And
let me ask a question if I could. Would it
yeah,
be okay?
yeah, absolutely.
a lot of things happened in a short period of time. Disconnections, grieving, hurt. There's a lot of, I want to call it chaos. It might not have been chaos, but it was definitely unsettling. Part of that, there has to be some grieving because you're losing things in order to gain new things. But there's a grieving process, and we all grieve differently. But we're all human, so we all have to grieve. And if we don't, we tend to hold on to things that are not good for us. Can I ask, what was that grieving process like for you?
It very much, first of all, it very much was, it felt like a grieving process for me. Um, and in terms of what it looked like, uh,
How did you do it? How did you experience that? And how did you, because in all of your, what you've just said, you are coming to the realization that this seems to be some type of pivotal transition moment for you. Every time it was, oh, you're disconnected from your social group. Oh, you're disconnected from work. Oh, and now I'm disconnected from the friend, the love of my life for 17 years. All that's done. It's gone. It's over here. But in order to get over here, there's this transition. You've got to express that emotion. You've got to come to grips with it. You can't let it build up inside of you. You did something.
sure. So, okay, so first of all, there were a lot of tears, um, a lot. And I know this is going to sound very trite, um, but a lot of it was moment by moment, one day at a time. So, um, you know, getting out of bed, getting myself ready for the day, looking at what I needed to do for the day,
Mhm.
not getting ahead of myself, but just what are the basics that I need to do. Um, and just really sometimes even, okay, what do I need to do this afternoon? And just moment by moment, day by day.
There's
It
nothing
would
trite
have been,
about that. Nothing at all trite. That's exactly how the body needs to adjust. Yeah.
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 And that's a good way. Yeah, I had to adjust. My body had to adjust. I had to adjust. And so moment by moment, day by day, um, definitely it helped that I had, some good friends that I could speak to. And even though they, there was not a whole lot they could do, obviously, but knowing that they were there and that they cared about me and believed in me that I would recover, was very strengthening. And even as I would be crying, that knowledge was very helpful. Um, there was another element too that came into the mix, and um, it's sort of the identity part of things,
Mhm.
uh, because you know, I, as with all of the changes, I realized how my identity had been, as my identity had adapted to all those situations I was in before, in some ways I'd lost touch with certain aspects of my identity.
Mhm.
And so um, that was also part of it, is kind of just taking time to think about that, to reflect on maybe there were some areas where I had been out of touch with my identity. For example, in the marriage, my husband had a business that he was launching, and I very much got, you might say, subsumed in under that, because that was the big focus. He was so, focused on that, and everything revolved around that. Um, and also just his personality and character. He had a larger than life personality, very gregarious, outgoing, charged through life like a tornado. And in a lot of ways, that was fun. But he had a very strong sense of self, and I had a weaker sense of self.
Mhm.
So it was not to say that he was domineering or controlling, because that was not his character. However, just by virtue of the power with which he charged forward, um, I got sort of sucked into that and lost a bit of myself. So in that transition period, there was a lot of just kind of looking at that, a lot of journaling, a lot of looking at what has gone on, what have I felt good about in the past, and what have I not felt good about. And sort of like, what have I done, and my role in things, and not in a sense of beating myself up or being down on myself, but just looking at, okay, where am I at?
Mhm.
And again, more so the what do I feel good about? What don't I feel good about? And what can I be doing differently going forward? What do I want to change? And how do I get back in touch with my identity? So some practical things with that. These might seem like little things, but they were huge. I remember I really liked the Alvin Ailey dance troupe. They were coming to my city. And so I called up a friend and arranged to go to that with her. And it was, again, it might seem like a little thing, but this is something I'm interested in. This is
Mhm.
something that I really enjoy. And I'm going to go and attend this event. And it was just one of those things that put me in touch with me and what I enjoy and what I value. Um, with another friend, we went to an art exhibit out of town. Again, just something that is very much my kind of thing that I enjoy. And just little things like that help me start reconnecting, putting me back in touch. Um, so yeah, those are some examples of kind of how things played out.
Well, can
Um,
we talk about your journaling? Journaling is a big part of manifesting your new sense. And people like to use that word. I don't always use it, but it's helping you focus on the words that create who you are, that tell you who you are. Can you share with us what words you were using in your journal to kind of recreate yourself? Because words are powerful.
right. Um, it's I I can't really point out any specific words per se, but it was more the journaling space for me is a place where I can be honest.
Okay.
Um, where I'm not concerned with how I'm looking to any in front of anyone or anything like that. Um, so one of the realizations that I came to through the journaling, there were issues in the past. Like I said, that sort of slightly weak sense of self, um, very easy for me to get caught up in someone else's agenda and out of touch with my identity.
Mhm.
And quite frankly, even at times, not having the level of self-respect that I think is appropriate and healthy.
Mhm.
Through my journaling, I was able to look back, and because I'm not trying to impress anyone in my journal or anything like that, I'm not concerned with my image, I'm not concerned with what anyone else is thinking. I could just really expose all of that, or have it as I would just write, it would flow out and be exposed and brought to my attention. And then from there, I could start to look at, okay, where do I want to go from here? Like, what am I thinking about this? And I was able to sort of write out that, okay, I want different for myself. I want better for myself. And one of the things that did sort of hit me at that time through the journaling, the last thing on my mind at that time was getting into another long-term relationship. Last thing on my mind. However, I knew that someday I would want that. And I realized that for me to have a different, healthy relationship that sort of had the attributes that I wanted it to have, it depended partly, well, largely on what I would be bringing to it.
Mhm.
So, who am I going to be going into that relationship when the time comes. And so that's where I was able to start just exploring all of that in my journal and writing it all out, um, and really looking at myself honestly. And like I said, really looking back honestly, um, looking back, looking at where I was at in the moment, and then looking at kind of where I wanted to get to. And I could just do that safely, in my journaling.
So, what did you find out about yourself? Who are you? Well, who did you want to become? Who is the you that I'm talking to now?
Okay, I have a very specific example I can give you that because I know it can be a bit sort of nebulous and abstract. So I have a very specific example I can give that really captures sort of what I looked like being a bit out of touch with my identity and then what it looked like getting back in touch with it.
Yes.
So, okay, so when I was married, the business that my husband was doing, it had to do with music and music software. And he came from a music production background. So music was very much, always there in the background, always there in the foreground, and he had a keyboard in our place. Um, and I had always wanted to play the piano ever since I was a kid. So it would seem logical that, okay, music is the big theme in our place and the keyboard is right there. And I've always wanted to play. You would think I'd be at least tinkering with it. I never touched it for 7 years. And, and it's not that he said I wasn't allowed to or anything like that. I, I was just so out of touch with that desire,
Mm.
that the most obvious thing in the world, like sitting down at the keyboard and playing around with it, never, never entered my mind.
Mm.
Like, even as I say it now, I continue to be stunned by it. Um, because it just seems so like, how can that be? Um, it just never entered my mind. Like, that's just how out of I was, like, I was functioning, and I was, and it's not to say I didn't have things, that I was doing that I liked, whatever, but just that deep desire, I was just so out of touch with it.
Mm.
Fast forward a few years, when I'm, in another relationship now, and that desire, as I'm getting back just in touch with myself, that desire sort of is reawakened and I recognize it. And so I say to my partner, you know what? I've always wanted to play the piano. It's there. I can feel it. I can identify it. And he was a musician. He had two electric pianos, so he gave me one. And so now I have this piano in my home, and it changes. It changes me because, eh, like, my sense of who I am. I have an instrument in my home. This has never been the case before. So that's it's sort of a feedback loop. That's there changing how I'm thinking about myself and seeing myself. I start tinkering with it. I'm feeling good. So, and I'm doing something new. It's exciting. I'm proud of myself because I'm in my 40s starting something new, which I think is, I just think that's a good thing that you're willing to do something new in your 40s. So I'm feeling good. And it's just changing how I'm feeling about myself and making me think about other things. Now, here's where it gets really interesting. After a couple of years, I realized, you know what? It's not quite going the way I anticipated, but I get the thought, I want to play the harp. 20
Good.
years ago, 20 years ago, if you had mentioned the harp to me, it just would have bounced off. Wasn't familiar with the harp, and I wouldn't have seen myself as being capable. It just would have bounced off. Because of that, getting in touch with my identity, there was also the growth and expansion of my identity so that there was the framework to hold that thought of wanting to play the harp.
Mm.
And so I got a harp. And right from day one, I loved it. And a few years later, I would get a second harp. And now I'm a harp player. And again, 20 years ago, I couldn't have the like, it couldn't have entered my consciousness to be a harp player. If you had offered to give me a harp, I probably would have said, "Oh, don't bother. It's not worth it." I mean, there wasn't the framework to hold it. And whereas over time there was, and that kind of comes back to what I said earlier about moment by moment, day by day.
Mhm.
Um, Sometimes there's something out there for us, but we're not ready for it yet, or, just the framework isn't there to hold it yet.
Right.
But step by step, you kind of get that framework in place. And as your identity is changing, it allowed me to go from someone who wouldn't even touch an instrument that's right there in front of me to now I'm entertaining the notion of getting one that I know nothing about. That's just popped into my head. Your identity can change and evolve over time. So that's, and even now, just I play my harps every day, but more than that, I look at them every day because every day they're a reminder to me of how important it is to stay in touch with my true identity, and then the excitement and the adventure that your identity can evolve and change. So
That's a lot to absorb all at once, especially in this conversation, because you've literally talked about losing everything, some of it intentional, some of it not intentional, but then you gave yourself permission to change. And that's permission I talk about a lot in things that in conversations that I have. And sometimes that permission comes from the outside and somebody says, yes, you can. But you said it to yourself. You gave yourself permission to evolve and change. And so can you in our last part of this in this conversation, can you tap into that a little bit? What it meant for you to give yourself permission to say, yeah, I need to do something differently, and then allowing yourself to do something differently. Can you share?
sure. That was really huge. And, sometimes when we go through difficult times, we wind up just naturally having a lot of time to ourselves.
Mhm.
Um, and, you never want to get to the place where you're sort of isolated in an unhealthy way. You need to have, your connections. But sometimes it's it's good to have a bit of space where you're not dealing with the pressures and expectations of everyone else around you.
Mm.
Um, I know for me, I was very vulnerable to just getting caught up in sort of what was happening around me. So, you know, um, what my husband wanted or the culture of that religious group. And so having painful as it was, and as you say, the grieving and the loss at the same time, just having a bit of space and really slowing down, having that space and asking questions of myself. You had asked me earlier about words in my journal. Again, I don't have specific words. I asked a lot of questions though, and sometimes I wouldn't have an answer that moment,
Mhm.
but I could come back. But that was part of it in terms of um, giving myself that permission to change and evolve and get in touch. Having the space to do that. And I guess that gets into something else, but sometimes we do need to evaluate the environments that we're in
Mhm.
and our circles and who we're engaging with. The other piece to that, as I said, I did have a couple of close connections who just how much they believed in me and had faith in me and always had it just seemed that they always felt I was capable of a lot and they just saw so much goodness in me. Um, and that really, at a time when I was in a weak state, I was able to draw energy from that. And that also helped in um, making me want to get to the next stage of who Susan is and who she can be.
One more thing, because now I need you to give something to the audience, those who are watching and listening. People come to my show because they know they're going to hear something inspirational, and typically heartfelt, and they've experienced that today. But if they're in some way stuck in this situation where they don't feel or don't see a way out, you talked about giving yourself permission, asking yourself questions, and allowing yourself to evolve and change. Can you give something to those who are watching and listening to give them some hope?
Sure. Okay. So the first thing I would say is take things step by step, day by day, even moment by moment. Um, that is so important. You don't have to have everything resolved or figured out for where you're going to get to ultimately in the future. If things are really at a difficult place and you're feeling limited in your energy, physically, emotionally, then don't start getting ahead of yourself. Just moment by moment, day by day. And even, making up the bed, if you can get that, that's one thing you've done. And you can have a sense of accomplishment about that. And trust me, there were many days when it was just, I made up the bed.
Yep.
Okay, that's one thing done. And then, plan whatever the next, I'm gonna have a shower and get cleaned up. Okay, I did it. And
Yeah.
just sometimes you really do have to boil it down to that. That's not where you're going to stay. But for the moment, it's okay. There's no one else gets to tell you how it needs to be or what it needs to be. So be it's okay. It's okay if it has to be broken down, just to little things like that, just moment by moment, step by step, day by day.
No better way to end this conversation.
Mhm.
Thank you so much for sharing this story and your time with me. For those of you who are watching and listening,